Okay. Well, we're back, and I'm pleased to introduce Seth Carmody from MedCrypt, who's going to be giving his snarky talk. Seth, can you hear us? Okay. Well, it sounds like he's got a speaker system deficient by default. So we'll give Seth just a moment to get his speaker system working. So while Seth is getting ready, I do want to just thank our two co-chairs. So Hans Martin and Sanharia will be coordinating on introducing speakers throughout today, and I'll be turning over the mic to them after this talk. But again, Seth, have we had success or deficiency on your microphone?
We are good to go, Kevin.
All right, I hear you loud and clear. Um, Okay. Well, you have the floor, Seth, and I see you've taken it. And thanks again for giving these remarks.
Yeah, no problem. You all see my slides here?
We do. We hear you and we see you and the slides.
Excellent. And I can interact with you, Kevin. That means I can ask you questions and you can respond and I can make jokes and stuff.
Yeah, certainly. As long as your jokes appeal to 129 people. And also, I reserve the right to pull up previous Archimedes photos of you from 10 years ago.
Yeah, okay, deal. I haven't
There's some very
workshopped
compromising ones.
even better. I haven't workshopped any of the jokes, Kevin, so I can't make any guarantees on funniness, but we'll try.
That's
Um,
back when Seth had hair.
Yeah, it's not going so well, Ken, at the moment. So I'm still trying. Kevin, you actually said something that I was thinking about in preparation for the talk. It's been a while, one since I was at the FDA in the hot seat there, and it's been a while since I joined for the first time Archimedes in 2015. I believe it was the first time I was out. It's been a few years. And somewhat naively, I thought as a public health protector and regulator that it would be like 5 years and we would be done, with medical device cybersecurity. I was slightly off in that prediction.
Well, you
Slightly
are a
off.
toxicologist by training, so
Wait,
we'll give you
uh,
credit.
thank you. Yeah, didn't get a degree in forecasting. So anyway, um, it's a brief talk today. I see some familiar faces on the phone. Some real tried and true veterans in this space. So some of this won't be new to you, but hopefully the 120 some odd folks on the phone will find this helpful for as a 101. Um, the talks is really roughly in two parts. Well, three parts. There'll always be sprinkled in history because I'm always going to be a history buff in this space. What some new stuff from the FDA is, and I see that Justin's on the docket for later, so you'll probably get a sweet update from him. And then just kind of observations from the field. Um, and really this what I was thinking about the tone and tenor of this talk, like what I wanted to do is avoid a sort of hyperbolic speak about what is required and what is not. And I think sometimes when you talk to, folks, it's like especially security practitioners or professionals, all the way up to regulators, we say that something is required, like you must do something. And there's a lot of nuance in that I don't think we've been talking about, or at least I've been holed up in my basement. So, I mean, maybe people were talking about it and I just don't hear about it. So we'll see, we'll figure that out later. But I just want to sort of introduce the notion that requirements have weights, which is something that I'm happy to engage in conversation about. So, without further ado, security by design or deficiency by default. Let's talk about some updates. So, in general, um, uh, the grace period is overish. What does that mean? Well, I mean, we've been working on this problem. Folks on this phone call, have been working on this problem for a long time. I got my start in 2011 when I first joined the FDA. And in the whole time, I would say it was a build up to sort of policy and then eventually law with 524B. And and is rightly so when you have granted authority on cybersecurity specifically, you move towards enforcement. So this notion of, although it's been a long time since we started building the policy base, enforcement has started in earnest. So and in my position at MedCrypt, we see clients that come in with issues. We see the direct result of that enforcement. So as a former public health regulator and person who wants to see a societal level change for cybersecurity, this is good stuff. We go as the FDA goes. So hooray that we're moving towards a more enforcement of policy and law. So what's been the general shift? We can talk about some nuances that we're seeing with boots on the ground. So we'll talk about a few key deficiencies. I know this is a 101, so excuse me if you already know, but deficiencies are sort of the love language of the FDA. Hey, you submitted this thing, you want to go to market. Uh, these are the things that are keeping you from market. Please resolve them, and you can go sell your wares in the U.S. market. And I want to say that like the key one of the key messages that I want folks to walk away from is like the enforcement, the future of enforcement, it's here, and it's increasing, and we'll talk about some examples of that, but it's unevenly distributed. Like some stuff gets through, and this is not a knock on FDA. They're inheriting, in other talks I've talked about, like inheriting a fundamentally flawed model, regulatory model. It's just an imperfect model for regulating these devices, right? You can't catch everything, can't catch every single detail. And I know that the FDA is looking at tools in order to help exert their reach and power, microscope, if you will, for looking through device submissions. So we see enforcement, it's not evenly distributed. Just a few quick notes. Just recently, we saw the sort of move from QSR to QMSR, the integration or harmonization with 1345. And we saw the update to the pre-market guidance that just essentially, my opinion now, cites uh, not just the QSR sections that are applicable to the pre-market guidance. Oh, by the way, the post-market guidance got an update too, which was just like a primer or a primer for you uh, more sophisticated folks, just calling attention to the change, but just generally citing clauses in 1345 to align the pre-market guidance to that standard and model. I don't have much more to say about this. There's lots of other folks that can talk deeply about that. Stole this slide from a colleague of mine, Naomi Schwartz. Do we have to throw away our QSIT guide? And the answer is no. I'll still be an applicable model. But there is a small change. I don't know if it's small. I don't work in the audit world, but you're no longer exempt from internal audit or management review records. And there will be a finalized inspection approach in some date in the future. I'm just breezing through these. I just want to make sure that they're updated. So put additional scrutiny on your design history file and, looking through dealing with submissions all day, every day. Um, you know, Feedback ties are the loosest part of what I would call programmatic design and implementation from a product security perspective. So certainly tying back into the design history file is going to get under more scrutiny, and folks are going to need to be even more vigilant in that regard. And then there was a inspection, BIMO or bio research monitoring final guidance update, and I wouldn't have ever thought that this had applications to cybersecurity, but again, talking with Naomi Schwartz at MedCrypt, um, she was like, no, you really have to think about data integrity and security from the data that you're collecting from a research perspective, so that when and if you're audited or inspected for this, from a BIMO perspective, you are defensible from a security perspective. So interesting uh, uh, intersection between cybersecurity and monitoring research. I don't know much about it, but I do know a person that does. But just thought I would mention it there as a significant, a update. So now to the heart of the matter, and we can spend a lot of simple slide, but we can spend a whole lot of time here. By the way, Kevin, how are we taking questions? Do I look at them in the chat? Are we facilitating it?
Oh, I will ping you about questions. At the moment, there aren't new questions at the moment, but attendees are welcome to submit questions in the Q&A, especially since, well, actually, we do have one old question I'll give you, Seth,
Oh,
that is
sure, shoot.
actually related. Previously, we had someone asked about the need to perform risk assessments. This was in the context of the neural implants, but I think it might be true for your domain as well. But do we need to perform risk assessments on devices to ensure we're in compliance with regulatory requirements for things like patch management? And so maybe pull out of
Mhm.
there, and this is going to relate, I think, to the talk we have later today with Andrew Carney from ARPA-H on upgrade and patching. Just where does patching fit into the regulatory frameworks here?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking back, immediately my mind goes to like where did the clauses come from in the pre-market from a patching perspective, right? The whole notion that you've got one of the security objectives is it has to be patchable, right? And then you look at, security control section and it's like it has to have this sort of, has to have mechanisms for being updatable and patchable. The notion was, when we were thinking about what the policy would be, this is probably, I'm rubbing my, like, is there something about history that's like I'm just rubbing my beard? Like somehow it becomes really important to remembering stuff. Um, so it's probably 2016, 17 vintage, so almost a decade, but just running into issues where we were seeing problems come in our door, right, from a post-market sense at the FDA, and we're like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could change the device? And I say that and it seems hilarious now, but at the time, manufacturers and not like in a pejorative sense, like the idea was to engineer the crap out of the thing and then set it and forget it, right? That was the notion, right? We didn't need to touch it from a functional standpoint, from its clinical purpose. These things were rock solid. Obviously, exceptions come along, and that's why we have sort of post-market mechanisms. But generally speaking, they were designed not to be changed, and we sort of like we sort of put this in the operational technology bucket. Like it's a thing it's designed to work very well for 40 years without being touched. Well, that notion, right, that sort of ethos was an anathema really um, to security, right? That security changed over time, and we needed to have mechanisms in order to change that device. But the notion of changing something once it was on market um, was like a complete, I don't know what the right word is, like a complete uh, cultural, structural, organizational, mechanistic procedural change within the devices. So with that history framework, right? Like what is patch management about? It's about being able to respond and change things in the field that's commensurate with risk. So yes, of course, risk assessment's part of it, but it's only part of the issue. So hopefully I captured and answered, but I can also offer clarification if I didn't hit the mark.
Right, and of course we open the floodgates, so there's plenty more questions I can go through if you'd like. Did you want to continue some of your own discussion points, or would you like to turn to more questions?
Let me talk a little bit about the three bullets up here,
Okay.
uh, and then it will probably will prompt other questions, but also it touches on the notion that we're talking about. So, um, in primarily like one of the transition points that I see today, right, is uh, risk assessment it should not be leveraged as a tool to sort of dismiss security concerns. And I say dismiss, and I'm really trying not to be pejorative, but like any my observation has been most businesses just say, do I really have to do this? Right. And it's not because they don't want to be secure. It's just like, I need to run this business. So what we see is the pressure, right, to take risk assessment as a tool, right, and say we don't have to do anything. And back to my sort of one of the takeaways I want folks to walk away from this talk from is that requirements have weights, right? So when I say, hey, you can't risk assess away security concerns, it's risky, right? It's not that you will universally be slapped by the FDA if you make a risk assessment and say, hey, we don't have to do this. You can go to FDA and you can make the case and you may get through. So I don't want to say universally that you can't use risk assessment and say, hey, we're going to subnet this thing, right? Which my opinion would be a fragile sort of more on the order of a labeling control than a security control is defined by or like a management control or operational control is defined by NIST. So it's risky. It doesn't always get you in trouble, but the FDA changes, right? Like, and we've seen an increasing enforcement. So it may come a time where it's like, hey, you need uh, you know, you're calling something that's an authentication control and it's not an authentication control, or it's not actually mutual TLS, and that actually gets you into trouble. We're in a transition point right now where it's not universally the case, but certainly making those choices are risky.
Okay. Well, we have a bunch of questions in here. Maybe
Shoot.
we'll, oh, go ahead.
No, shoot, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll take it. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe I'll turn to one about, oh, by the way, I do have the slang-o-matic here, and somebody's using reading. What's the T? I think is the Gen Z question. So what's the T on common deficiencies that you've seen over the last 12 months? I'm not. That's probably more of an FDA question, I'm imagining. But what kind of enforcement do you expect to see coming from FDA, just based on your experience?
Yeah.
And where are the squeaky wheels over the coming horizon? And
Yeah.
where do you see FDA's attention drawn? And what are some of the drivers behind that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, and it's directly related to item two here, right? I think the FDA has done an increasingly good job of flagging deviations and submissions from the guidance, from pre-market guidance. So that includes everything from like you literally did not, in your risk assessment, or they'll say generally like, hey, we didn't see where your authorization controls were, or where are your where are your like where are your patching controls and things like where are those things like where in going down the list from the guidance and like just saying here are all the bullets that you need to fulfill, like where are these things, right? So those sort of all encompassing, like, you're missing these specific details. Now they may be in the submission and it's in a weird spot or it's described differently. But generally speaking, that's where what is getting flagged. Any deviations from content in the guidance, um, labeling and sort of in the field detection, right, capabilities. If you haven't described those or pointed directly to those and said these are the controls, those are the types of things that are getting flagged. And I do have a couple of examples. I think it's on the next slide, so I'll go there. But I'll mention three first because it's part and parcel of what we're talking about. Um, like it's getting flagged. These things are getting flagged. Like we get questions all the time, like, you know, uh, can I make it to market with an unsupported operating system? And the feedback from the FDA, right, is by and large like you can try it, right? But like there's just no standard policy on stuff like that. So like, hey, how do I get to market with an unsupported operator? I don't really know. I wouldn't try it, but you might be able to. Like that. So if the FDA hasn't come out and said you cannot get to market with unsupported operating system, then I guess there's some wiggle room. It may be a very, very tight window or needle to thread, but
Mhm.
those are the types of things that one get flagged against the pre-market guidance, but some stuff will make it through. It's just how it works.
Um, and so if it sails through and somebody said, "Oh, see, we didn't need to do that," that might not be the case next time around. And I'm
Yeah,
actually head
that's
nodding in the room by we'll keep.
yeah, and I think that's like speaks to the the increased enforcement is like we've had a rash of folks come to us and they said, "Hey, look, this worked in 2023." Right? And it doesn't seem like that long ago when you think about like development life cycles. It's like this is literally the next iteration of the product. And you're like, it's not
Mhm.
working, right? And again, it's the like R&D is going to do R&D. Like they have their own set of incentives, right? So I don't blame them for being like operating under that method, but it or that paradigm, but it just shows that the bar is raising, right? And it's the trajectory of security enforcement's up and to the right, um, which is that's a great thing. It's just now again we're in that transition. It's like these have these sort of old, not I won't call them old legacy designs, but tried and true designs from a clinical and marketing perspective. They're now running against these newish requirements that are just not passing muster now. So um,
Will you allow me to get a little bit nerdy for a moment, though? And
Kevin, no, absolutely not. Like why you
So-
go
oh, so
ahead.
we've got a whole chorus in the room now going, "Oh yeah, here it comes." So I want for the attendees who aren't manufacturers, just to give you an idea of sort of the daily life of a manufacturer. So it's it's not easy for anyone to accomplish this. It sort of sucks that there's an adversary out there who will try to cause harm if you give them an inch or a centimeter, 2.54 centimeters. And the example on the operating systems. So we say like don't use an unsupported Windows 10 box, which is important. But let's say you're a manufacturer and you've got an embedded device. Maybe it's like an 8-bit. Go back to the 8-bit Nintendo. There are some microcontrollers out there that have 8-bit architectures, and for those we have one sort of computer architect in the room. But for those of you who are not in computer architecture, the number of bits basically represents how many wires you can transfer information from parts of the computer internally, and it really limits uh, like code size, number of instructions. And so some of the old school stuff only worked on 8-bit, and so hey, you need to roll out the newest embedded operating system. Great. Maybe it won't even work on the hardware that's deployed. And so you have to actually rip out the computer chips and put in a new one, which is basically replacing. And so, manufacturers are up against those kind of constraints. But in my view, it's unfortunately technical debt. But I'm curious, Seth, if you have a different
Yeah.
view or if you've seen things where what if the hardware is sort of so constraining that you cannot meet either statutory requirements or regulatory requirements? What are your
Yeah.
options? And
Yeah.
I think this
Um,
is somewhere in the survival guide, for certain death.
Yeah, it's we're in a transition point where I think we're going to start to see FDA basically say this design isn't good enough. We've seen a couple of examples where it trended that way when say it's exactly your example, but there's a reason why 8-bit architectures are still on the market and probably being brought to market today is because they work. Um, and and that plus like increased enforcement, like the last time they went through it, like it was okay, and then therefore the business is incentivized to come back with that same architecture unless they had the foresight to say, "Hey, is this going to work this time around?" And then did a pre-sub maybe I don't know how many years before. I don't know if there's folks have the foresight to do that. Um, but we're in a transition point where I think folks are not going to get to market under certain circumstances with, hardware that can't cut it, software that can't cut it, based on what FDA's level enforcement is at that moment. So I personally have seen a few examples. I wouldn't say where it's like, hey, we have to redesign the hardware, or like we chose the wrong hardware and now we've ruined 2 years, 3 years, 5 years of work. I do think we're headed that way. Not sure when.
Mhm. Oh, Sanharia. did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just had a
It's not
question
our.
slash comment. Can you hear me? I was in.
Yes.
Okay. So, Seth, I think you made an interesting point, about how manufacturers face this dilemma, right? Part of that is also cost, right? There's pressure on the cost of the hardware.
Yeah.
Um, and the cost sensitivity in the market drives you towards having hardware that's not capable of a lot of things, or maybe capable of some
Minimally
things, but
capable.
not everything that you want.
Yes.
So what do you see? Where do you see that going? It's like the cost has to increase if you want the
Yeah.
hardware to be more capable.
I mean the reality of the situation is, Sanharia, we go as the FDA goes. So until FDA says this hardware doesn't pass muster, I think there's little incentive for an R&D unit to pay for extra w bells and whistles that get you the security. Like I think kind of what we're alluding to is there's some cliff, right, that will happen that's hard to predict because
Mhm.
enforcement is here, but it's not evenly distributed, right? And it will increase. So I think there's a moment probably for let's say that the universe of medical devices is 10 device lines, right? Well, for the five that have moved, have don't suffer this problem, but the five that are going to run into this problem, that you're going to see one fall off, right? Like, hey, a business unit's going to have a very bad day. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think there's some, I'm not sure there's a magic wand or I don't know what the thing is, but there's not a magic thing to say to convince a business to spend on hard. You might get lucky, but generally speaking, I think the pressure, as you said, is to minimize costs unless it's absolutely necessary. And that's why I'm just like my latest sort of thought pattern is like requirements are only are weighted, right? So if the FDA has enforced it, that becomes a weighted requirement. So until that happens, like they're just best practices. So um not a great answer, but like that's the reality of the situation. There's cliffs coming for business units that are getting by, and it's going to be painful. I'm not sure there's an argument to be made.
Yeah. So just a time check, we've got 2 minutes remaining, and so Seth, we do have some other questions, but feel free to continue if you have some other points you'd like to get to.
Yeah, how much time do I have?
Uh, 2 minutes.
Sweet. I can do that. It's real quick.
You can probably get 3, 5, 10Ks in that time, right?
Yeah, you know it. So here's some top deficiencies. There's more, but what are the ones that are sort of rising to the top of the moment? And I do like this top one here. Unresolved pen test findings for it, again, I'm not trying to, make light of a situation, but it just like when I review these things and I see that, from in the pen test report, you've got, individual findings and they don't make their way back into the risk assessment. And you're like, well, what was the resolution here? There's no traceability. Like not only is traceability broken, but it's like, I'm not sure what the process is here. Those things are starting to be increasingly flagged, including age of the pen test. We've seen a bunch of stuff on age of the pen test. SBOM's a mess. Uh, incomplete SBOMs. End of life, end of support is the huge thing right now. Trying to resolve that is it's both easy and super complex, and that is you have to go through due diligence, and even if you don't know, you have to have some way to say I don't know in a way that the FDA understands that you went through your due diligence and that you're going to track it over time. As I mentioned, missing controls, like it may or may not pass muster, but certainly what won't pass muster is like not tagging controls or requirements as in this one of the 8 security category, control categories, and then labeling like you gotta enumerate the labeling. There's like 14 elements, I think that at least in the labeling, they point to MDS squared, they point to I think product security white papers. I can't remember at the moment. But yeah, being thorough with your labeling is also critical at the moment. And with that, Sanhara, you brought up a great point. It's one of my things I'm trying to solve. I haven't quite gotten there right now, but like, how do we balance business drivers with cybersecurity requirements? I think there's a needle to be thread there. I can sort of feel it, but I'm almost in the dark and I can't quite touch it. Um, I can tell you right now, dealing with folks, that designing the program is easier than implementation execution. What I mean by that is like it's easy to say this is what threat modeling should be. Executing that and making sure all the feedback loops are closed, especially in the post market, is hard. And that's where people tend to fall down. Requirements have weights. We've already nailed that. We do have a shift to QMSR. And I can't emphasize this enough. If I could go back in terms of closing thought here, Kevin, if I could go back to my policy days, um, uh, and if I could restructure the guidance, the pre-market specifically, I would build in some notion of a maturity table, like because I think the guidance talks it goes in and out of like ideal states and like practical states, and I would just love to kind of restructure it like here's where we're going to be in first 5 years, right? Let's get everybody here. And then, you can go beyond if you want, but like next 5 years, like we're to the next stage. You know what I mean? So you look at some of the SBOM stuff, some of that stuff is like not even in control of the manufacturer. You know what I mean? So it's like I think setting expectations about where we should be and where folks can get to it would be really helpful.
Mhm. Well, thanks for this talk, Seth, and thanks for the conversation. We're out of time, so I apologize to all the Q&A that we were not able to get to. We're going to go on a break, and then afterwards, Sanharia and Hans are going to come back and introduce our next speaker, Greg Garcia.